We tend to think of the Civil War ending with that famous surrender. But what if the real war, the one for the very soul of America, was just getting started? After the battlefields fell silent, a totally new kind of conflict erupted, not with cannons, but with laws and loopholes. This is the story of Reconstruction.
Yeah, the cannons were silent, but a whole new war began, one fought in the halls of Congress and in the courts. The question wasn't who won on the battlefield anymore. It was, what kind of nation was America actually going to become?
And to really understand this post-war battle, you have to rewind the clock, way back before the first shots were even fired, because this conflict was literally written into the U.S. Constitution from day one.
Just think about that for a second. The 3/5 compromise. By counting enslaved people for representation, even as only a fraction of a person, the South got this huge, unearned boost of power in Congress and in presidential elections. For over 70 years, this single compromise fundamentally shaped who ran the country and what laws got passed.
And then came the Dred Scott decision in 1857. Man, this wasn't just some dusty court ruling, it was a bombshell. The Supreme Court declared that black people weren't citizens, they were property. This decision slammed the door on any peaceful, legal path to resolving the issue of slavery. At that point, war was pretty much inevitable.
Okay, so fast forward, the war is fought, the Union wins, and freedom is finally at hand. Or is it? Because as soon as the 13th Amendment was passed, a really swift, really calculated backlash began, and it all hinged on exploiting one single crucial exception hidden in the text.
I mean, on paper, this was it. The monumental victory for freedom. It abolished slavery and involuntary servitude. But the real story, the one that mattered, it was in the fine print. A loophole that was about to be turned into a weapon.
So here's how this trap worked. It's a 4-step process. Step 1, the loophole. Slavery is legal unless you've committed a crime. Okay, file that away. Step 2, Southern states immediately passed what they call black codes, making things like simply being unemployed a crime. See where this is going? Step 3, mass arrests of newly freed black men for the tiniest, often completely made-up offenses. And finally, Step 4, those same men are then leased out to plantations and companies. It was slavery by another name, all done through a legal backdoor.
Well, up in Washington, Congress saw this absolute betrayal of everything the war was fought for, and they decided, enough. They were going to take control. And this period, known as Radical Reconstruction, was basically a dramatic federal counterattack, using the full force of the law to try and reshape the South.
And just look at how fast they moved. This was a full-on congressional counterpunch. In 1866, they passed the Civil Rights Act, and they do it by overriding President Johnson's veto, which, by the way, was the first time that had ever happened in American history. Then, they basically put the South under military rule, dividing it into 5 districts run by Union generals. And to top it off, they pass a law that was a straight-up trap for the president.
So this trap was something called the Tenure of Office Act. It basically said the president couldn't fire his own cabinet members. Now, Johnson was a Southern Democrat who was constantly clashing with this Republican Congress, and he saw this as a direct attack on his power. Furious, he defied them. He fired his Secretary of War, Edwin Stanton. And boom, he walked right into it.
And that was all Congress needed. The House immediately voted to impeach him, and the whole thing went to a trial in the Senate. And in the end, President Johnson kept his job by a single vote. 1. That's how close they came, and it just shows you how intense this power struggle had become.
So to make sure this progress couldn't be easily undone, Congress decided to go big. They aimed to write these changes directly into the Constitution itself. The 14th Amendment was a direct shot at that Dred Scott decision. It granted birthright citizenship and guaranteed equal protection. Then the 15th Amendment came along to secure voting rights, at least on paper. Congress was trying to carve these hard-won gains into stone.
But here's the thing about this constitutional tug-of-war. For every pull, there's a pullback. And just as fast as Congress acted, the Supreme Court and some shady backroom political deals started pulling in the exact opposite direction. The progress of Reconstruction, it was about to be systematically torn down.
And this is a big one. This is where it all starts to fall apart. The Supreme Court steps in with something called the Slaughterhouse Cases. And their ruling? They say that the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause, well, it only applies to a really narrow set of federal rights, not the everyday rights granted by states. This decision absolutely gutted the amendment. It was basically a green light for states to start discriminating all over again.
And if you thought that was bad, just 3 years later, it gets worse. The court rules that the 14th Amendment only stops state governments from discriminating. It doesn't apply to private citizens or, violent terrorist groups like the Ku Klux Klan. The federal government had just announced to the whole world that it was powerless to stop them.
The nail in the coffin was a political deal. The 1876 presidential election was a complete mess, totally disputed. So a compromise was hammered out in a back room. The Republicans get to keep the White House for their guy, Rutherford B. Hayes. And in return, they agree to pull the last federal troops out of the South. The protectors were officially gone.
And just like that, it was over. With the army gone and the courts looking the other way, Reconstruction was officially dead. That brief, bright window of hope slammed shut, and the long, dark era of Jim Crow, of legal segregation and voter suppression had begun.
Okay, so why are we talking about this now? Why does this history from over 150 years ago still matter? Because the tools and the weapons forged in this period of intense political warfare, they didn't just vanish. They became a permanent part of our political system, and you can still hear their echoes in the halls of Congress right now.
The legal logic that tore down Reconstruction was officially locked into place with Plessy versus Ferguson. This is the case that gave us the infamous separate but equal doctrine. It became a powerful legal weapon that made segregation the law of the land for more than half a century. And then there's this political weapon, gerrymandering. Now, the practice is actually older, but its use to crush votes and lock in power was perfected after Reconstruction. The drawing of these bizarre, squiggly districts to essentially choose your voters before they choose you, still one of the most heated debates in American politics today.
And of course, there's the filibuster. This is a tactic unique to the Senate that lets a minority of senators literally talk a bill to death, grinding everything to a halt. For decades, it became the weapon of choice for Southern senators to kill any and all civil rights legislation. It's a direct legacy of the bitter conflicts from this period.
Which brings us right up to today. It still takes 60 votes, a supermajority, to break a filibuster in the Senate. That number, 60, is a constant reminder of how a determined minority can stop the will of the majority, a tactic with deep roots in the fight over Reconstruction, and it's at the very center of our political battles right now.
So here's the big takeaway. The high-stakes political wars of Reconstruction created a whole arsenal of legislative weapons: the veto override, impeachment, the filibuster. These tools, they weren't put back in the box when the era ended. They became a permanent part of how we do business in Congress. And it leaves us with a pretty heavy question. What happens when the fight is over, but the weapons remain on the field?